Greetings, traveler. Many people ask me what it is like to work in the games industry compared to any other job you could potentially do. I want to talk about specifically this topic today, and I want to share three really good parts about working in the games industry and three more difficult, more challenging aspects of working in the games industry today. My name is Xanthos. I've been working in the games industry for over 13 years now, and when considering a career choice, something to go in for long term, the games industry is not the highest on the list. Definitely, there's the air of fun and creativity and so on around it, and there is the perhaps misconception that all you do is play video games every day, which is actually different from making video games every day. But it definitely has its pluses, but it also has its negatives. So let's jump in and explore those. And let's actually start from the cons. So one of them is definitely that work can be repetitive. By that, I mean that when you start working on a game project, there's going to be lots of every single thing that we typically have to do. If we're talking about game levels, typically you will have to create many game levels. If we talk about characters, there's lots of characters to create. If we're talking about items in the game, there's lots and lots of items in most games. So every single item that you see in a video game needs to be handcrafted by someone. There's no algorithm we can plug in and say, just create thousands of interesting items. Even if there is such an algorithm in place, somebody has to set the options, somebody has to set the rules for each one of these items getting created or generated. So having to do the same process over and over and over again is definitely an aspect of the job. Now, this is typically described as a negative. Other people find it relaxing to just sit down and do a familiar, repetitive process over and over. But thinking about in a common sense way, it's not typically an aspect associated with games. So games are like fun and interesting all the time. So this type of repetitive work is definitely something to keep in mind for most work in the games industry. It's also tedious. By that I mean it's not easy in the sense that when you go to work, typically you'll have to um, solve difficult problems or handle difficult situations most of the time. It's not like doing data entry where you know the entire process and you're just doing it day in and day out. It's not like uh, I don't know, from what I hear, working in McDonald's where you just have to make the same burger thousands of times. Um, Even if you're doing repetitive work, there's patterns that change all the time. And typically that work requires high skill to do and it requires problem solving to do. So it's not very simple. You have to work together with many different areas in game development. You have to have a good understanding of what the sound team needs, what graphics requirements there are, what processing limits we have, what the code expects, and so on. So it's fairly complex, more so than perhaps most other jobs out there. So that complex, like high challenge, complicated, very delicate, very involved kind of work is definitely a characteristic of working in the games industry. And finally, the last of the cons is low pay. Now, again, perhaps you have a good position, or perhaps there's some positions out there that offer pretty competitive pay. But by that, I mainly mean that if you take a person who has a skill set good enough to be working somewhere in the games industry, typically, most of the time, huge caveat here, most of the time, using the same skill set, uh, that person can find a job somewhere else for more pay. Now, of course, that job will have a different pros and cons characteristic. But usually, let's say, especially for programmers, this is very true. If you can code a game with all these crazy requirements, typically you could work somewhere in the insurance or finance industry and make 5 or 10 times more salary. If we're talking about artists, typically working anywhere in advertising um, has more often work and usually better paid work than a video game. Or if we're talking about testers and designers, well, testers, it's part of software, so the same applies as programmers. And for game designers, if you can design a video game with all its complexities and all its requirements and needing to please all the gamers out there, you typically have enough understanding to be able to design many other things that are of industrial use or of everyday use, and companies that make those typically um, have more customers and typically make more money. Again, we cannot be absolute about this because obviously there's exceptions to this, but the games industry having lower pay than other industries out there is a characteristic of it. Again, it's not necessary that your particular job will be lower paid than the options, but something to keep in mind. And now that we have the cons out of the way, let's jump into the pros, which I think, in my opinion, way overweight the pros in this case. First of all, it's challenging. Now, somebody might put this in the con list. I definitely put it in the pros list. If I had to choose between doing the same task every single day and it being super easy and never changing, and having to solve challenging problems every day, I would choose a solving challenging problems every day, because somehow I get fulfillment and happiness and joy from it. I enjoy tackling all these difficult problems. I enjoy doing something that I know many other people wouldn't want to do, or they would find it too difficult. Having this challenging task ahead of me is invigorating and motivating and inspiring for me to work in. So this type of work is readily available in the games industry. There's always challenging problems to solve. Even if you're very good at your role in one project, when you move to a new project, the team composition changes. Usually the type of the game itself changes. Maybe you're working on an RPG and the next game is a racing game, for example. So you have to relearn many things. You have to readapt to many things. Plenty of fresh new problems to solve. So there's always a challenge working in the games industry. Another thing is that it's definitely creative. So part of the creativity comes from having to come up with new solutions to tackle the challenges of working in the games industry. But another part of it is that it's literally creative. So you have to think of new characters, think of new mechanics, think of new ways to code a certain ability, think of creative ways to combine software or create new sounds or new art to delight the users, to do something that hasn't been done before. In that sense, the games industry is pretty much on the bleeding edge of the industry, I feel. Something that's unique about entertainment, all the entertainment related industries in general, is that unfortunately humans, or fortunately, humans, when it comes to entertainment, we get saturated very easily. Our taste for entertainment gets saturated very easily. To give you an example, if you've watched a good movie, then that's it. You watched it. You can only watch it, a couple more times before you get completely bored with it. If there is a good video game that you've played, you can play it for a while, but it will lose its interest, or it will lose its appeal over time. But if you think about chairs, cars, houses, we don't think about these objects in the same way. We think about them as serving a purpose. So if a chair serves its purpose, then you have no reason to stop using it after 5 years or 10 years or 50 years. Sure, you could get a more interesting one, but then we're going into the entertainment aspect of chairs, not the usability aspect. Typically, those items only evolve over time as they become better and their performance gets better. But so many items in society just need uh, usability reason to exist. They only serve a functional purpose, and as long as they do, we can keep using them. Unfortunately, games are not like that. If a game is good, you don't keep playing it forever. You play it for as long as it's interesting, and then you move on to the next thing. So creativity and innovation and invention is very much in the DNA of the games industry. And finally, I need to mention that it's a comfy environment to work in. And here you might say, what do you mean? Maybe I work in a bad company. Maybe the company is cheap and they're buying us cheap chairs and cheap desks and it's crammed and whatever. That is very true. But considering all the possible options out there, there could be many more physically challenging jobs. And by that, I mean that typically to do your work in the games industry, you just need to work at a computer, maybe go to a meeting. It's not physically strenuous. It's not something you will physically get tired by doing. And it's definitely better than, or not better, but less physically strenuous than doing manual labor, working in a busy restaurant where you have to move around all the time. It's typically a quieter environment. It's typically a quiet, comfy environment. It's um, very relaxed. You're just sitting down at a computer. So I mentioned this because um, there might be jobs out there that are alternatives to working in the games industry, and people might complain that, oh, working in the games industry has low pay and it's the long hours and the difficulty and so on. But at the same time, we shouldn't forget to consider the alternatives, right? So perhaps for a little bit money, you have to put in, I don't know, 3, 5, 10 times more physical effort than the job in the games industry. Or sure, you could do a similar creative job. You could be, for example, a chef in a restaurant, making creative food all the time, coming up with new items or making sure the customers have their food. But it's a pretty high pressure, high physical activity environment. So if that's something you are sensitive to, that is something worth considering. So that's it for the quick rundown of what's it like to work in the games industry in a very broad scale, what you can expect and what the pros and cons are. Of course, this is just a very, very high level view at the industry. If you're wondering, about a specific position or the typical tasks of a typical position or what or a specific aspect of uh, game companies, so video game companies, please let me know and I'll do my best to answer. Anyway, that's it for today. I hope this helps at least one other person out there who is considering working the games industry and going through the alternatives right now. And hopefully you find it helpful. Anyway, that's it from me. As always, have fun.